2020 was quite a year. I hope that didn't come as a surprise. Guild Wars 2 also had its ups and downs in 2020, but in this video I want to look forward to what we can expect of Guild Wars 2 in 2021. Although no date is confirmed, we can safely assume that the next expansion, The End of Dragons, will release in 2021, so that's something to look forward to. It's me, Kyo, and let's head into the video. Last year I hoped to see Eye of the North again as an explorable area, and we got it in the end. I think the Eye of the North is a nice hub where players can team up for instance content for the Icebrood Saga. In 2020 we had a decent chunk of content for this Icebrood Saga. Although we had some nice maps like Drizzlewood Coast, which is great for farming gold and exclusive items, some veteran players still didn't get what they were looking for. The Icebrood Saga made some big promises and ArenaNet still has to deliver on some of these aspects. It was promised to be bigger and better than the Living Story ever was. However, some episodes were of similar size to a Living Story episode. Content like Dragon Response missions are nice, but it's not the challenge that most people were looking for. Dragon Response missions do have potential, but they need to be more challenging, more clear and more rewarding. But I also hope that ArenaNet does not neglect the strike missions we got earlier this year. It's best to avoid creating a ton of instanced content that will be confusing for newer players. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain the difference between a strike mission and a Dragon Response mission. In essence, they are the same, but somehow still a bit different. The Icebrood Saga has not ended yet, so it's still possible for them to deliver on some of these big promises. For now, we know that the Icebrood Saga is going to end in 2021. The last chapter is called Judgment and will be released in May of 2021. After this has been concluded, we can safely assume that the expansion will be next. Alright, spoiler warning ahead, because this is how I think it is going to end. Right now, we are up against Jormak as our enemy. She has recently turned Ryland and Bangar into soldiers of her own army. We got Bangar captured in the Eye of the North and Ryland is off with Jormak to stop Primordus, another Elder Dragon. In the last episode, Chapter 1 Truce, we got called in to protect several cities and landmarks against the attacks of Primordus. The Elder Dragon Primordus sends destroyers to these cities and landmarks and we have to protect them. The Azuran city, Ratasum, is one of these targets. And to our surprise, the Elder Dragon Jormak comes to our aid. Not the Elder Dragon itself, but she sends Ryland to aid us against the destroyer threat. The Azuras side with Jormak against a common enemy. And that's where we are right now. In the next episodes, we are probably going to dive a little deeper into the intentions of Jormak and Primordus. I also expect, and this is all speculation, that one of these dragons will die. We have seen this before, that an Elder Dragon can die during a Living World episode. This happened with Kralkatorrik in Season 4. I also think that we'll see a limited amount of new maps for the Icebrood Saga. We already had a ton of new maps, and they are a bit abandoned right now. I think ArenaNet is going to adjust or add events to these maps. This saves time and resources that could be put into the new expansion. An example of one of these events is, think of a destroyer or an Icebrood event that pops up in Bura Marches. This all happens while the story slowly moves south, back to Lion's Arch, where there is a harbor that could lead us to Kantha. I expect to hear more about Kantha in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 of the Icebrood Saga. I also want to briefly touch on the new game modes we got last year. In 2020 we had at least 3 new game modes added to Guild Wars 2. We had Strike missions, Visions of the Past and the Dragon Response missions. Basically all 3 of these game modes do the same thing. You get a party or a squad, enter an instance, beat up a couple of enemies and then face the final boss. Nothing wrong with that, and I personally really enjoyed Strikes and the Visions of the Past. But I think it would be wise to bundle these together into one portal to be easily accessible from the Eye of the North or even Lion's Arch. This would be easier to understand for newer players or players that buy the Icebrood Saga chapters later. This would also avoid some clutter between the game modes that currently exist. To be fair, I don't think this will happen, but it would be a smart thing to do in my opinion. There was also talk of more raids and fractals in 2021. I'm actually more excited for that than any other game mode. Raids are my weekly replayable content. I still enjoy these types of content, even the raids that were released in 2015. Although I personally did not enjoy Wing 7 as much as I've wanted to, I'm still really enjoying raids as a whole. That's probably the reason why you see so much raid content in my videos. There was a statement about more raids in the future and the difficulty of these raids. ArenaNet aims to have the difficulty of a raid wing in line with the Spirit Veil and the Bastion of the Penitent. And for me personally, I think this is the perfect difficulty to satisfy most players. Mechanics can easily be understood by casual and hardcore players alike. Also, having a repeatable challenge mode for each of these new bosses will keep hardcore players excited as well. More raids, yeah, that's something I want to look forward to in 2021. I think that the raid wings will be themed after the new expansion as well, so it's probably going to be a more Asian themed raid. Another game mode that we'll probably see more of in 2021 will be World vs. World. World vs. World is one of those game modes that was prominently announced when the game first came out. However, over time it became more of a niche for hardcore players, and even those players faced some struggles with the current state of World vs. World. The only game mode that restricts you from playing with anyone in your friends list is World vs. World. When you first create your Guild Wars 2 account, you have to select a server to play on. These offer little to your gameplay experience since you can just meet up and team up with any other player from other servers. This is not the case with World vs. World. You play World vs. World with players from your server against players from other servers. If you happen to have a friend from another server, chances are that you cannot play World vs. World with them. Although this problem is partially tackled with the world linking implementation back in 2016, where servers are combined into one to increase the player count on low population servers, it still does not solve the main issue. Back in 2018, alliances were introduced. This would solve a number of problems that World vs. World players currently have. The alliance system allows players to create their own alliance where guilds and players can be invited into. As a forum post describes, a World vs. World alliance functions as a party for guilds. When a world restructuring happens, all the players from one alliance will be put into that same world. This allows you to play with your friend that is in the same guild but on another server. The idea was welcomed by the World vs. World community, but also by the rest of the player base. This would allow more casual players to get into World vs. World with their friends who happen to play on other servers. World vs. World would become more accessible for everyone because of this feature. However, after the 2018 blog post, it became quiet around alliances. Not much news was released about alliances and players became impatient. Honestly, I expect that alliances are still on the table and I hope the plans are being worked on. I also think that ArenaNet is looking for the right opportunity to release the alliances. The new expansion would be a great time to do so. With the influx of new and returning players and the fact that every game mode usually gets something new whenever an expansion drops, it sounds like a good time to drop something big like that. However, with the little news we got about alliances, there is still some room for skepticism, but for now, I expect a new map and alliances for the End of Dragons expansion. It would be best actually to release the map when the new expansion comes out, but I hope to see alliances before the new expansion. This allows players to experience the new system before the expansion and allows ArenaNet to tweak it a little bit when newer players start rushing into World vs. World. As for PvP, this game mode could also use some fresh air. The game mode has not seen much new content over the last few years and this leads to players leaving the PvP scene. And also, there have been some reports of some suspicious activity going on there. Hopefully, this game mode gets a revamp. All problems aside, there have been mentions about large-scale PvP battles. For example, a large PvP map where you fight a 15 versus 15 battle, and that sounds pretty cool to me. Also, special tournaments and on-demand tournaments have been mentioned before. However, there is currently no information about the release date and the current state of these projects. I would almost forget about it, but there will be alternative ways to launch Guild Wars 2 in 2021. Or well, at least one way as we know now. Guild Wars 2 will be released on Steam in 2021. But why is this so special? And wasn't this supposed to be released last year? Well, as many people state, Steam is a place to easily discover new games to play. You can filter for games of a specific genre or even a specific price. Since Steam is one of the bigger gaming platforms in the world, I expect that the release of Guild Wars 2 on Steam will get some extra players into the game. Other MMOs like Black Desert Online and the Elder Scrolls Online can already be found on Steam. Black Desert Online got about 30,000 new players when it first came to Steam. At least that's what the Steam charts say. So let's hope for something similar for Guild Wars 2. In my personal opinion, I think Steam is a nice way to let people know that Guild Wars 2 is there. But I'm also skeptical about the player type it will attract. Usually players that play a game on Steam will play a game for a few months before Steam recommends them the next best thing. So a player from Steam will only stick around for a few months. Not saying that this is a bad thing, but I think that is the way it is going to go. Anyway, every player counts and I'll be happy to see more people enthusiastic about the game. So let's hope they stick with it. The Steam release was supposed to be in November of 2020, but since there were some performance issues in some areas of the game, the release was delayed. Not only that, most of their development resources are focused on keeping the current players happy with the release of the new Icebrood Saga chapters. Thunderhead Peaks, among other living world maps, could easily get laggy whenever a large number of players play the meta event on these maps. That needs to be addressed first before a major release, although I do think they tweaked a few things in the past. Although no exact date is available as of right now, I expect to have the Steam release later in 2021, presumably around the time of the release of the new Guild Wars 2 expansion. This is when the buzz for Guild Wars 2 will be at its highest. Now, I have mentioned it a dozen times in this video, without talking about it yet. Guild Wars 2 will bring a new expansion to the table in 2021, at least that's what I expect. The last chapter of the Icebrood Saga will launch somewhere in May, and I expect that the expansion will be the next best thing after that. Last summer we saw the awesome announcement trailer where a mysterious creature talks to Kunavang, a dragon from the original Guild Wars. ArenaNet has a habit of releasing an expansion late in the summer or in the autumn. Let's say in August, September or October of 2021, the third quarter of 2021 basically. The base game was released in August, Heart of Thorns in October and Path of Fire in September. So let's hope that End of Dragons will also release by then. The End of Dragons expansion will bring us to Cantha, an Asian themed area that was also in the original Guild Wars. The trailer showed us a number of landmarks that could be found in the original Guild Wars. I already dedicated a video to the landmarks shown in the trailer, so check it out if you haven't already. But what will this new expansion look like? Well, we know little about the expansion, but I expect it to be of similar size and with similar features to other expansions. And in my opinion, that's good. That means that we get 9 new elite specializations, 1 for each profession. This adds an extra layer to your profession and it allows you to play your character in new and exciting ways. However, what could also happen is that they might not release new elite specializations and they release a new profession with a new race instead. New players easily get overwhelmed by the amount of skills, traits and other abilities you get when you first activate your elite specialization. If there is going to be a new race, then it's probably going to be the Tengu. We have already seen them in game and there have been small hints that point towards the Tengu. The hints are minor or small, so I wouldn't bet my money on it just yet. The last 2 expansions, Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire, both had favorable reviews. However, there was some criticism from players as well. Heart of Thorns could be experienced as somewhat annoying due to the map design. The huge number of layers made it hard to navigate through a map. Take for example Tangled Depths. Path of Fire solved this issue with more structured open world maps. However, these maps offered little to no replayability. Heart of Thorns maps offered good meta events with great rewards, whereas Path of Fire lacks these events and rewards. I hope End of Dragons can find equal ground here, offer replayability but also challenging events with great map design. If they can do that, then well, we have a really good expansion on our hands in terms of open world content. Cantha was one of my favorite areas in the original Guild Wars, so I'm really looking forward to this expansion. So, what do you think is coming to Guild Wars 2 in 2021? Did I miss anything, or is there something you would like to see in 2021? Let me know in the comments or come chat with me on Discord. For now, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!